The run for Tunis was part of the Tunisia Campaign, which took place during November and December 1942 during World War II. Once French opposition to the Allied Operation Torch landings had ceased in mid-November, the Allies made a rapid advance by a division-sized forces from Algeria, to capture Tunis and forestall an Axis build-up in Tunisia and narrowly fail. Some Allied troops were fewer than 20 miles short of Tunis by late November, but the defenders counter-attacked and pushed them back nearly 20 miles. To positions which had stabilized by the end of the year. Background: Allies. The planners of Operation Torch had assumed that Vichy would oppose the landings and the invasion convoys had a preponderance of infantry to meet ground opposition. At Algiers, the disembarkation of mobile forces for an advance did not commence until the 12th of November, making an advance eastwards possible only by the 15th of November. The Allies had only 2 infantry brigade groups from the British 78th Infantry Division, an armoured regimental group from the British 6th Armoured Division and some additional artillery for an advance. An attempt to reach Bizerta and Tunis overland before the Axis could establish themselves was a gamble which depended on the ability of the Navy and Air Force to delay an Axis build-up. Although the Allies planned for determined Vichy opposition to the Torch landings, they underestimated the speed with which the Axis could reinforce Tunisia. Despite intelligence reports regarding the Axis reaction, the Allies were slow to respond, and it was not until nearly 2 weeks after the landings that air and naval plans were made to interdict Axis sea transport to Tunis. At the end of November, naval Force K was reformed in Malta, with 3 cruisers and 4 destroyers, and Force Q was formed in Beaune with 3 cruisers and 2 destroyers. No Axis ships sailing to Tunis were sunk in November, but the Allied navies sank 7 Axis transports in early December. The success was too late because the tanks of the 10th Panzer Division had arrived. Axis convoys began to sail in daylight when they could be protected by aircraft. Night convoys resumed on completion of the extension of Axis minefields, which severely restricted Force K and Force Q. Vichy, Tunisian officials were undecided about whom to support, and airfields were left open to both sides. On the 9th of November, reconnaissance flights reported that 40 German aircraft had landed at Tunis, and next day British photographic reconnaissance showed around 100 German aircraft there. That day the Regia Aeronautica sent 28 fighters to Tunis, and 2 days later an airlift began which eventually carried 15,000 men and 581 short tons of supplies. Ships brought 176 tanks, 131 guns, 1,152 vehicles and 13,000 short tons of supplies. By the end of the month, 3 German divisions, including the 10th Panzer Division and 2 Italian infantry divisions, had arrived. On the 12th of November, Walther Nering was appointed to the new 90th Corps and arrived on the 17th of November. The French commander in Tunisia, General Barré, moved the Vichy troops into the mountains and formed a defensive line from Tebessouk through Majaz al-Bab, with orders to resist an attempt to cross. Prelude: Vichy armistice. By the 10th of November, French opposition to the Torch landings had ceased, creating a military vacuum in Tunisia. On the 9th of November, Lieutenant General Kenneth Anderson took command of the Eastern Task Force in Algiers, which was renamed the British First Army. Anderson ordered troops eastward to seize the ports of Bugey, Philippeville and Beaune, and the airfield at Djedjeli, preliminary to advancing into Tunisia. Allied planners had ruled out an assault landing in Tunisia. Because of a lack of troops and the threat from the air, the Allies needed to advance before the Axis could reinforce Tunis. On the 11th of November, the British 36th Infantry Brigade had landed unopposed at Bugey, but Supply difficulties meant Jeddah was only reached by road on the 13th of November. Bone Airfield was occupied following a parachute drop by 3rd Parachute Battalion, and this was followed up on the 12th of November by No. 6 Commando seizing the port. Advanced guards of 36th Brigade reached Tabarka on the 15th of November and Djebel Abiod on the 18th of November, where they made first contact with opposition forces. Further south on the 15th of November, U.S. Army paratroopers of the 509th Parachute Infantry Battalion made an unopposed drop on Yaxles-Bains, captured the airfield and took the airfield at Gafsar on the 17th of November. On the 19th of November, General Nering demanded passage for his forces across the bridge at Medjez and was refused by Barre. The Germans attacked twice and were repulsed, but the French defense was costly and lacking armor and artillery. The French withdrew. Despite some Vichy French forces siding with the Allies, the position of most Vichy forces was uncertain. On the 22nd of November, the North African Agreement placed Vichy French North Africa on the Allied side and Allied garrison troops were released for the front. The Axis had been reinforced to a core and outnumbered the Allies. Planned there were 2 roads eastwards into Tunisia from Algeria. The Allied plan was to advance along the 2 roads and take Bizerte and Tunis. Once Bizerte was taken, Torch would come to an end. Attacking in the north toward Bizerte would be the 36th Infantry Brigade of the 78th Infantry Division, supported by Hart Force, a small mobile detachment from the British 11th Infantry Brigade, and to the south the rest of the 11th Infantry Brigade. On the left was Blade Force, an armored regimental group which included the tanks of the 17th, 21st Lancers, U.S. Light Tank Battalion plus motorized infantry, paratroops, artillery, anti-tank and anti-aircraft guns and engineers. Battle. Allied attack. The 2 Allied columns advanced towards Djebel Abiod and Bethar under attack from the Luftwaffe, which had local air superiority. Because Allied aircraft had to fly from distant bases in Algeria, on the northern road, the leading elements of the 36th Brigade made rapid progress until the 17th of November, when they met a mixed force of 17 tanks, 400 paratroops and self-propelled guns at Djebel Abiod. The British knocked out 11 tanks, but having no tank support, were held up for 9 days. The Allied columns concentrated at Djebel Abiod and Bethar, preparing for an assault on the 24th of November. The 36th Brigade was to advance from Djebel Abiod towards Mata, and 11th Brigade was to move down the valley of the river Merjada, to take Majaz al-Bab and thence to Taborba, Jeddah and Tunis. Blade Force was to strike across country on minor roads, in the gap between the 2 infantry brigades, towards CDN-SIR and make flanking attacks on Taborba and Jeddah. The northern attack was cancelled because of torrential rain, and in the south the 11th Infantry Brigade was stopped by the defenders of Medjez. Blade Force passed through CDN-SIR to reach the Chaugui Pass north of Taborba, then Company C, 1st Battalion, 1st Armored Regiment, U.S. 1st Armored Division with 17 M3 Stuart light tanks, supported by armored cars of the Derbyshire Yeomanry, infiltrated behind Axis lines to an airbase at Jeddah in the afternoon. The Allied tanks destroyed more than 20 Axis aeroplanes, shot up buildings, supply dumps and caused several casualties. Lacking infantry support, the raiders withdrew to Chaugui. The surprise achieved by Blade Force alerted Nering to the vulnerability of garrison at Medjez to a flanking move, and the defenders were withdrawn to Jeddah, only 30 kilometers from Tunis. The 36th Infantry Brigade attack began on the 26th of November, but Nering used the delay at Djebel Abiod to lay an ambush at Jefna on the road from Sejanani and Mata. The Germans occupied high ground on either side of the road, which after heavy rain was very muddy and the ground on either side impassable for vehicles. The leading British battalion had 149 casualties. Kent Lemon sent units into the hills to outflank the Germans, but the determined defense of the paratroopers in well laid out defenses could not be overcome. Her landing by No. 1 Commando 14 miles west of Bizerta on the 30th of November to outflank the Jeffno position failed. The commandos rejoined 36th Brigade by the 3rd of December and the position remained in German hands until the last days of the fighting in Tunisia in 1943. German retirement. Early on the 26th of November, the 11th Infantry Brigade entered Medjez unopposed, reached Taborba unopposed, ready to advance on Jeddah. Next day, the Germans attacked, inflicted 137 casualties and took 286 prisoners. The brigade attacked again on the 28th of November towards Jeddah Airfield and Combat Command B, 1st U.S. Armored Division, lost 19 tanks to anti-tank guns in the town. On the 29th of November, fresh units of the 1st Guards Brigade, which had arrived at Algiers on the 22nd of November, began to relieve the 11th Infantry Brigade. On the 29th of November, Combat Command B had assembled to attack with Blade Force on the 2nd of December. The 2nd Battalion Parachute Regiment was to be dropped in Operation Naudna on the 3rd of December, near Axis airfields around Dapien 30 miles south of Tunis, to destroy Stuka dive bombers and to threaten Tunis from the south. The main attack was forestalled by an Axis counter-attack on the 1st of December and the attack by Blade Force did not take place. The 2nd Battalion retreated 50 miles to Allied lines under frequent attack and lost 23 killed and wounded and 266 missing. The Axis counterattack was conducted by the 10th Panzer Division, which had just arrived in Tunisia from the north toward Taborba. Blade Force suffered considerable casualties and by the evening of the 2nd of December had been withdrawn, leaving the 11th Infantry Brigade and Combat Command B to resist the Axis attack, which nearly cut off the brigade and broke through. Desperate fighting by 2nd Battalion, Hampshire Regiment and the 1st Battalion, East Surrey Regiment for 4 days delayed the Axis advance, and with the fight of Combat Command B against armoured and infantry attacks from the southeast, enabled a slow retirement to high ground on each side of the river west of Taborba. The Hampshires suffered 75% casualties and the Surreys nearly 60% casualties. As more Allied troops arrived, the 5th Corps of the 1st Army took command all forces in the Taborba sector, which included the 6th Armored Division, 78th Infantry Division, Combat Command B from U.S. 1st Armored Division, 1st Parachute Brigade, 1 and 6 Commandos. All three considered the depleted units facing Taborba were vulnerable and ordered a retirement of about 6 miles to the high ground of Longstop Hill, 900 feet high, and Boea Ukaz on either side of the river. On the 10th of December, Axis tanks attacked Combat Command B on Boea Ukaz, bogged in the mud, and then U.S. tanks counter-attacked and also mad and were picked off, losing 18 tanks. Subsequent operations. Another Allied attack was ready by late December 1942, when the Allied force comprised 54,000 British, 73,800 American and 7,000 French troops. A hasty intelligence review showed about 125,000 combat and 70,000 service troops, mostly Italian, in front of them. On the night of 16/17 17th December, a company of the 1st U.S. Infantry Division raided Manassi, 155 miles south of Tunis, and took 21 German prisoners. The main attack began the afternoon of the 22nd of December. Despite rain and insufficient air cover, elements of the 18th Regimental Combat Team, 1st Infantry Division and the 78th Division 2nd Battalion, Coldstream Guards of the 1st Guards Brigade made progress up the low ridges of Longstop Hill that dominated the river corridor from Medjez to Borba and thence to Tunis. By the morning of the 23rd of December, the Coldstreams had driven back units of the 10th Panzer Division on the summit, been relieved by the 18th RCT and withdrawn to Medjez. The Germans regained the hill in a counter-attack. The Coldstreams were ordered back and next day regained the peak and dug in with the 18th RCT. By the 25th of December, ammunition running low and Axis forces holding adjacent high ground, the Longstop position became untenable and the Allies were forced to withdraw to Medjez.